Okay, let's get going here. We've got a full schedule tonight, as we always do, Monday through Friday, in our 23rd year of serving you with information that we'd like you to consider, not to believe, but just to engage in the process of thinking, evaluating, make your own decisions. I'm not here to tell you what to think, just asking you to please engage in the process. That's what the government and many others don't want you to do. They don't want you to think anymore. They just want you to accept and to react and follow orders. We have, as our first guest tonight, a man I hold in extremely high regard and I have not been able to spend much time with him over the years. I think he's been on twice in the past. He is Professor Dr. David M. Jacobs, Ph.D., who has just written another book. And this doesn't happen very often. That's the point. Let me read a little bit from the back for you so you get an idea. The book is entitled Walking Among Us: The Alien Plan to Control Humanity. Well, that might or might not be a bad idea, depending upon how you look at it. The threat is real. Walking Among Us is a chronicle of human experience that contradicts every current theory about the universe that we think we live in. David Jacobs' human observers have experienced a concealed reality that is literally next door to some of us, and that he believes is about to interact secretly and insidiously with the rest of us. Walking Among Us explains why extraterrestrial UFOs are here, who is aboard them, and what they are doing. To put it mildly, the evidence from the people that Jacobs has interviewed shows that the extraterrestrials are up to no good. You'll find Walking Among Us hard to put down. It ought to be a bestseller, and I hope it is. If enough of us read and pay attention to the evidence in this book, we might be able to avoid the disaster that its evidence portends. Written by Don C. Donderi, Ph.D., Associate Professor, retired of Psychology, McGill University, Montreal, author of UFOs, ETs, and Alien Abductions. There are more, but David, welcome back to the program. It's been far too long. I know you're busy, but I'm really glad you took time to be with us tonight. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me, Jeff. I appreciate it.
I don't know how. I'll bet it's been 15 years.
Probably, yeah. The last book I published was a book published by University of Kansas Press called UFOs and Abductions, Challenging the Borders of Knowledge. But that was an edited book that I did. With, there were 10 sort of important figures in the UFO and abduction world who wrote chapters. But the previous book I wrote was The Threat, which came out in 1998.
Well, there you go. Okay, 98, that would have been, well, shortly after that. I started this program in 94. So, yeah, The Threat. Now, I remember this book on many levels, and one of them was that it really brought to bear upon those who read it the reality of an ongoing operation on this planet. And David called it The Threat. And the interesting part of it is that when he began his research, he didn't want to go to the conclusions he came to. He was just looking for the facts. And they brought him to some facts that were very uncomfortable. What can you sum that up for our listeners who may not remember The Threat, which is a classic?
Well, the first book I wrote on abductions came out in 92, called Secret Life, where I concentrated sort of on what happens to people during a typical abduction event. And I'd only been doing hypnosis for about 5 years at that time, and I still was not able to fully understand what was real and what wasn't real, so I made a couple of mistakes in that book that I'm a little bit ashamed of now. But The Threat was the next book 5 years later, and that book was much more much less involved with what they do to abductees, although it was that, of course, but also about something that the gray aliens, anyway, were saying to abductees, which was, soon we will all be together. Soon everybody will be happy. Soon everyone will know his place. And
now this you heard from more than one person. I want to make
absolutely.
that clear. All right.
No, one person never makes it into print.
No.
So you have to wait, for other people who are unaware of that testimony to say basically the same thing. And I've got a lot of people saying that. And so the gray aliens would say, well, soon there's going to be a change. The change is coming, and everybody's going to love it. It's going to be the change. The change is coming. And I
wonder why they always said it was going to be a positive change and everyone would love it. If they're behind it, I guess they would love it, but maybe
that's
we
the thing.
wouldn't.
Yeah, that's exactly right. This is what they said. Everybody's going to be happy. But I think that they mainly meant themselves. I don't think they particularly care about humans one way or the other, to tell you the truth. But other than to overcome them. But I sort of ended the book with this business about the change that was coming in the future. And people would say, well, when is this going to happen, on board the UFO? And they would say, soon. And I said, well, what do you mean by soon to abductees? A million years from now, or 50,000 years from now, or tomorrow, or, what does soon mean?
What's their time frame? Exactly, yeah.
And nobody knew. And so everything was going along merrily, and I'm still doing research, and I'm listening to the same stories over and over again, and I'm fighting to keep awake while people tell me the most important things that have ever happened in the history of humankind. And but it's the same stuff over and over again year after year until 2003. And then somebody tells me a story that was just off the wall. And now, for me, something off the wall has got to be really strange. So he told me that the first thing he told me was that on about the fourth session I had with him, or third session, something like that.
First of all, David, he came to you and said, I'm having experiences. I'd like to work with you and try and find out more. Was that it?
That's exactly it. They have to fill out a questionnaire on my website. They have to talk with me. I have to persuade them not to come and do it. I have to tell them all the cons of what would happen once if anything is going on with them.
Sure.
And there's a lot of cons. It's a whole different world once you understand what's going on. And he went through all of this, and there's more things, obstacles I put in people's way as well. And after all, I do hypnosis with abductees, and it's different and it's unusual and it's strange and all that. We can talk about that later if you want. But the fact is, though, that about the third session I had with him, he remembers that he has a friend. Friend's name is Eric, and Eric is his best friend, and he sees Eric all the time. And he doesn't know Eric's last name, and he doesn't know what Eric does, and he doesn't know if Eric has a family, and he doesn't know where Eric lives.
That's his best friend.
But that's his best friend, and they've been together for years. So since this was 2003, since 1988 or 89, something like that.
Well, that got your attention.
Yeah, so we began to do sessions involving Eric, and it turns out that it was this hybrid guy who sort of followed Bernard around and learned how to do this and learned how to do that, and had long conversations with him about families and about what it means to be friends and how friends should act towards each other and this and that. And they went to restaurants, and they went to different countries, and or at least they met at different countries, and they had this whole sort of life with him. And
so your client was educating a hybrid. Basically.
In essence, yes, he was answering questions that the hybrid would ask, not vice versa. And then one day he comes in, and he said that he was a fanatic Baltimore Orioles fan, and he would drive down from New Jersey to go to he had season tickets, and he'd go down with a daughter of his or whatever it was, and
he was married.
Yes, married with kids. Oh yeah, he was about 50 years old.
So Eric would come into their home and have dinner with them, and
no. Eric, this is not Eric. I'm talking about Bernard. The abductee.
All right.
He didn't know where Bernard lived, so.
So Bernard is the hybrid.
Right.
But did Bernard go to Eric?
No, Eric is the hybrid. Eric does not have a
That's what I thought.
Name.
Okay, all right.
Just Eric.
Got it. All right. Did Eric come to Bernard's home for dinner? Were they that close? It was a separate thing from the family then.
Right. Absolutely.
All right.
Although he actually had introduced a member of his family. They met by accident somewhere, and he introduced a member of his family to him. But so then he tells me that he went down to the Orioles game last week or a week and a half ago, whenever it was, and this time he decided to go alone. I said, "Oh, okay." That he almost never goes alone, but okay, all right. I said, "What did you do with your other ticket?" And then he sort of paused, and then he couldn't remember what he had done with his other ticket. So I said, "Well, did you stand out in front of the stadium saying ticket here, and sell a ticket or something?" He said, No, he didn't do that. I said, "Well, did anybody sit next to you at the ball game? You would know that, I would assume."
I would assume.
He long paused. He couldn't remember whether anybody sat next to him or not. So he did a session on that, and there was Eric. He had actually picked up Eric on the way down to Baltimore, and took him to a baseball game. And I sort of start out the book with this baseball game story because it's so totally insane. It is completely off the wall, and how you take a hybrid to a baseball game. By the end of the book, I go back to the baseball game.
It could have been a good title.
That's right. But by the end of the book, the reader, if they stick with all of the testimony I've got, and I've got a lot of transcripts in it, if you stick with it all the way through, then you understand, oh yeah, going to a ball game, that would be normal, as opposed to completely abnormal.
Got it.
So what this book is about is the question: are they walking among us? And I used to love that question years ago. Loved it. That was my favorite question in the world to answer.
Are they walking among us?
And I loved it because I got to say, absolutely not. There is no evidence whatsoever that they are walking among us. That made me feel good, feel sane. You know what I mean? I felt I could say no here. It wasn't the sky.
Well, it gave you a feeling that we're still in control of something.
We're still in control of something. All those feelings ran through me. I loved it. Yeah. Now, I hate that question. Now I'm forced to say, yes, the evidence seems to be that they are, in fact, walking among us.
I think there are a hell of a lot of them myself. I'm not a professional like you in this field, but that's just my gathering after 23 years of doing this.
Right. Well, what happened was when Bernard told me all that stuff, that goes on the back burner. It's got to be other people who say the same thing. Soon, there was another person who said the same thing, then another one, then another one, then another one. New people who I was working with, and people I'd worked with since, one person especially, since 1987.
So it flopped in 2003. It flopped over, and something changed. Because you know what Professor Jacobs said about his first book, The Threat? He said, whatever it is going on here, he felt they were getting near the end of that particular phase of the operation.
Apparently, when people began to say the same things as Eric said, I'm sorry,
Bernard.
As Bernard said, I began to think this was the change. And if I discovered it in this corner of southeastern Pennsylvania where I live, and the New Jersey area and surrounding a little bit, if I discovered it there, the possibility that it began there, and I was the first to stumble on it, is zero. There is no possibility that it began there.
Right.
This is a global phenomenon. And so if I found it in southeastern Pennsylvania, it is everywhere.
Bernard must have really enjoyed Eric's company. Eric must have had a personality. He must have been able to be charming or at least enjoyable to be around, you'd think.
Yes, it was that he had a certain sort of childish quality to him, mainly asking questions about how to do certain things and how to live in this society. He was
kind
more
of silly things, I'll bet, that would seem, in a way.
Well, a lot of the transcripts that I have in this are questions and about things that you would just never ever imagine people talking about.
Such as, give us an example.
Well, like my favorite story in the whole book is of a 10-year-old kid who visits an abductee in her home. This is not unusual, with a caretaker. He didn't come down alone. He has an adult hybrid caretaker. And
now, folks, let me say, excuse me, David, I'm sorry. Hybrids look like they could pass. They do pass. They can pass for us. I also think they have an ability to generate in the immediate area around them the sense that they're normal to people. And I think our minds are their playground in a way, that they are very advanced in their ability to implant feelings and thoughts and to take away any anxiety. He might look a little odd, but people won't react that way. Is that an accurate statement?
That is exactly right. Let me backtrack just a little bit. From the very beginning, from the first account of an abduction we ever heard in 1957, the Antonio Villas-Boas case, to the Barney and Betty Hill case of 1961, to every other abduction case that's been carefully examined, there's a reproductive aspect to them.
Yes.
And
sure.
People are shown, people have eggs taken from them, women do, men have sperm taken from them. Women are then implanted with embryos. The embryos are removed about 10 or 11 weeks later. They are then put in gestation tanks filled with nutrients, and we see them eventually as babies. There's a spectrum of them. Some look really very weird and sort of a gray alien-like. Some look sort of half and half. Some look more human, etc. We see them as toddlers. We see them as young kids, as older kids, as adolescents, as young adults, as adults, but not as older adults for some reason or another. It's very, very rare that you'll see somebody above the age of 40. But
a hybrid above the age of 40.
A hybrid. All these hybrids. So they're a combination of human and alien DNA, if in fact aliens have DNA, and I can't swear to you that that's true. I
wonder if they've whipped the aging process somehow. Or do we just not enough time yet?
Right. No, hybrids age normally, although we don't see them in old age. Now, that could be that they're jettisoned into deep space or something like that when they reach the age of 45. I don't know. But I make the case in this book also that gray aliens are also hybrids.
Oh, interesting.
Probably with human DNA. There was something about the gray aliens that always bothered me. And that was their mouths. There's a slit for a mouth. Absolutely everybody has described that. I mean, there are probably thousands.
Very thin, hardly any lips, very thin.
Yeah, but there's a slit for a mouth, 2 holes for a nose, there's holes for the ears, there's big black eyes, that sort of stuff. Well, they don't breathe, and they don't eat through their mouths, and they don't have teeth, and they don't talk through their mouths. So why should they have a slit for a mouth? I could never understand it until I began to think the only way that would happen would be if they were themselves hybrids, because otherwise they just would not have grown up like, let's just say, what I call the insectolins. There's this people who are abductees describes several different kinds of beings on board these objects. One of them looks like insect aliens, insect-like aliens. The most common description is of a praying mantis, and that is actually a fairly good description. And having researched this now since 1986, when I started doing hypnosis on it, I've come to the conclusion that they are the ones in charge, that they are the sole leaders of the group, that they put everything into motion, that they are the ones who decided to come here in the first place for whatever reasons, and that though they eventually would need a workforce, because these tall insect aliens, or insectolins as I call them, do not come down and abduct people. It's the gray aliens who do it, or the other hybrids who do it.
But traditionally, we've thought of the gray aliens as being automaton, robots, servants, whatever you want to call them.
Well, in essence, that's what they are. They are a workforce that is dedicated to doing their jobs, their tasks.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what they are. But they are living sentient beings. They make mistakes. They do things incorrectly from time to time. Most of the time, they're pretty darn good at what they do. So now that I'm skipping a part here.
That's okay. Take your time. I'm going to go through the break, Todd. So we got another 4 or 5 minutes extra here, David. So go ahead.
So what they need is the abduction phenomenon is intergenerational. If your mother or your father was an abductee, their children will be abductees. And when those children marry non-abductees, because most of them don't know that they're abductees, then their children will be abductees. So what you get is a spreading out in the society of abductees. And when that happens, you need a larger and larger workforce.
Got it.
So a lot of the egg taking and sperm taking I think, goes towards making gray aliens, or gray aliens are simply cloned, which is actually a more enticing aspect for me, in that because they all really look alike. There's no.
Well, it's more assembly line, and it'd be simpler to do.
It would be much simpler to do, and I think that they're. I don't know for sure. So they're either hybrids, still hybridizing them, or they're clones, one of the two. But what you get is a spread then of more gray aliens, and probably more UFOs as a result of that. In other words, once the population starts to spread, a cascade of events happens automatically. Then you have kind of reptilian-looking like ones. People say the reptilian-like aliens. Now, on the internet, everybody and his sister talks about the reptilians.
Oh, yeah.
They are. I get them every once in a while. It's uncommon, but
when you say you get them, tell me.
Yeah, I mean, people will describe them every once in a while. Maybe I'll have 20 sessions with them, and they might describe them once, seen them once. Now, when you talk about gray alien, I'm sorry, the reptilian-looking ones.
You got the insectolons, you got the reptiles. Who's on first?
Right, the reptilins, as I call them, and then the gray aliens, and then there's a growth, and then there's hybrids that look more and more human as you go down the line here.
And then you've got a word in here, hybrid, H-U.
Right, until the final product, and the final product are the ones who are moving in here and who will not be living their lives out on a UFO. They are, as part of the workforce, they are moving in and living here. Their job is to live here, as one said. And if you ask them why you are doing this, they don't know, and they don't care. Their job is to live here. They are human in every way imaginable, and they are average in every way imaginable in terms of looks, except for one thing, as I talked about on the thread, and as you mentioned, they can control humans neurologically and make them do anything they want to do, or make them think anything they want them to think, and we cannot do that to them. That makes us a second-class species,
Absolutely.
Not a second-class citizen, and them a first-class species. And so that's what this book is about. How is it? How are they moving in? How are they living here? How are abductees helping them? What happens when they go into a supermarket to shop?
Yeah.
How do they learn how to drive? All that kind of stuff. And abductees teaching
Remember,
them.
they don't come here as little babies in diapers. They come here at an older age. Walking Among Us is the book, and I cannot urge you enough to read this book by Professor David Jacobs, Ph.D. It is essential. I'd like to tell you a little tiny story, if I can.
Sure.
That may further illustrate this. I was a single father, raised my daughter, and my daughter was about, 7 or 8, something like that. Maybe she was she was more like 5 or 6. We were walking. There were 5 of us in the group. A former guest had come up to Santa Barbara to see us, and in the front row, me and the former guest. Behind us, directly behind us, 1, 2, 3, was the guest's couple, a friend of theirs, to a man and a woman, and then she had come up with them. There were 3 of them. And then my daughter. I could have reached with my right hand, I'm in the front row, my right hand back and touched my daughter. She was right behind me. She'd never leave. She'd always stay close to me.
Uh-huh.
Well, we're walking up this very busy sidewalk in Santa Barbara about 8 o'clock at night, and it's in the summer, and it's still light out, and the stores are all lit up, and really busy. It's a wide sidewalk. So there's 2 of us in front, me and my guest, and then behind, my guest's 2 friends who came up with her, a man and a woman, and then my daughter. And I could reach with my right hand, just touch my daughter if I needed to. I wouldn't, but she was that close.
Uh-huh.
Well, I had this feeling to turn around. I turned around for no particular reason and looked behind her, walking up the street at a very fast rate, was a skinny little boy who I would guess would be about 10 to 12 years of age. He had a khaki pants on, a green plaid shirt, I'll never forget this, and a little canvas cap with the brim turned down all the way around his head. He had a slit for a mouth. He was very odd-looking, very plain face. He was walking up behind my daughter, and he was staring right into my eyes. He looked me right through. And the next thing I know, I'm turning forward again. I had turned around forward, and there is my daughter, 50 feet ahead of me, standing stock still on this busy sidewalk, looking into the eyes, he was a little shorter than she was, of this whatever it was, and not moving, just staring at him. He was, I call it, he was downloading her brain. I couldn't move. I said, what? And the woman next to me said, why is Alexa up there? And the people behind me said, you've got to go get her. What is that kid next to her? Looked like a little kid. I couldn't move. We were stuck. The one woman behind me with the man broke loose, ran. I then began to walk, ran up and grabbed my daughter. She was utterly entranced, in some kind of a trance. She grabbed her away from this kid, shook my daughter, and said, wake up, what are you doing? The little kid with the little hat, he looked like a little kid, little thin mouth, little thin eyes. He turned and looked at me again, just stared at me, and then turned away 180 degrees and just walked on up the street.
Well, did you ask your daughter what was going on there?
I said, what was going on? And all she said was, Dad, did you see his eyes? They were strange. We walked to the car, David. Nobody talked about it. It was not discussed. The only thing that was said was, that was really strange. And that was it.
Well, were there a lot of people on the sidewalk walking with you?
Dozens and scores of people. It was busy, both people walking both ways. This is about a 14-foot wide Spanish motif sidewalk. It was an enormous sidewalk.
Yeah.
It was full of people. And this kid, I call him, he was no kid. I don't know what he was. I'd have to say he was a hybrid. Maybe he was a hybrid. I don't know. But he had an interest in me, and he had a very strong interest in my daughter, who, when she used to go visit her mother at the age of 4 and 5, would say her best friend would come visit her, and I'd say, oh, your mom has a friend in the apartment building down there. This is a different city they lived in. I had to drive her down.
Yeah.
And she said, yeah. And I said, well, who is this? Well, I don't know his name. He's just really nice. He comes to visit me, and we play games and stuff. I said, well, how does he come visit you? Did your mom let him in? No, my mom doesn't know he's there. What do you mean? How does he get in? He comes in through the window, Dad. Upstairs. Her bedroom was upstairs.
Yeah.
So he came right in through the window. I mean, I'm not talking about opening the window. He came through the window. And would play games with her, and that was her friend. So
yeah,
that's my weird experience.
Yeah, you might want to, if you ever have the urge to go to somebody like Yvonne Smith and Ella.
Yeah, sure.
A person knows how to do this kind of work and see what was going on, but ethically, I can't really say anything. I don't know.
But it does tend to fit the template a little bit.
Well, these things don't usually happen in if a person is abducted, they usually happen when they're going to be missed the least. Mm-hmm. So it's at night, or it's when you're in your car alone, preferably, mm-hmm. or I don't mean you, but a person, or just when they're not going to be abducted in the stands of the Super Bowl,
right. Well, she wasn't abducted, but he was doing something to her mind. Somehow, some way, he was deeply extracting, download, whatever you want to call it. I don't know.
Yeah.
They were locked. I mean, I'm locked eye to eye.
It is unusual, and it's unusual because in what I have learned, when these Huberts, the ones who are moving in, are ready to move in and live here, mm-hmm. they look perfectly average in every conceivable way.
He could pass totally. He could have totally passed. Just thin features. That's all.
Thin features would not pass muster. They would have to look average.
Ah, well, then
and average people don't have thin, not in the United States, very thin features. Mm-hmm. Although every once in a while you will, but it's not average. It seems to me.
Gotcha.
And
all she would say was, Dad, did you see his eyes? It was a little kid. He's like 10, 12 years old, but he wasn't.
Yeah.
When he looked at me, I knew I was looking into the eyes of something that was not normal.
But he was wearing a baseball cap with the cap down in the back.
It was one of those little canvas hats with the brim all the way around turned down. It could be turned up or turned like a sailor cap, but littler.
Right. Yeah.
And a plaid shirt and khaki pants. He dressed normally, but what's a kid that age doing on a busy street sidewalk at 8 o'clock at night by himself?
Right. It's unusual for the abduction phenomenon, let's put it that way, because when kids are put on Earth, so to speak, to mm-hmm. look around, they're almost always in groups of 3 or 4. And they almost always have a caretaker with them.
Huh. Uh-huh.
And they sit in a park bench and watch people. Or they'll go to a mall and watch people.
Ah.
And things like that. And they look just like regular kids and wear regular kids' clothes.
Uh-huh.
Nothing unusual about them whatsoever, because when they get older, they're going to be moving in. Therefore, they look average.
Uh-huh. Got it.
So that's That's what I've been finding anyway.
Well, this was an odd event then, I guess, of some sort. There was definite interest in certainly in my daughter, and probably, I don't know, in me somehow as the father. I don't know. But when he looked at me, the next thing I know, remember, I'm looking backwards. Next thing I know is I'm standing stock still, staring straight ahead and seeing my daughter 50 feet ahead of me.
Yeah.
So, I mean, she never would do that.
It's odd on all levels. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. All right, we have to pause here for just a couple of minutes. We'll come right back. This is, again, people, this book is essential for you to read and to consider. Walking Among Us by David Jacobs, the alien plan to control humanity. And he says the Hubrids now are absolutely, totally average-looking humans. They've got it down somehow. All right, we'll be right back with David. Hang on. Okay, again, please put this on your list or just go to Amazon and get it right now. It's called Walking Among Us. And also, read David's earlier book, The Threat. This is 1-2 stuff. And stunning. This is as honest and as clear as you're ever going to have it presented to you about what may well be going on here. All the evidence points in this direction. This is not just hyperbole. It's not just thought, fantasizing, nothing. This is hardcore work. Go ahead, David.
Well, you're right. Yeah, I haven't worked with that many people. I've worked with about 150 people, and I've looked at about 1,150 different abduction events. Mm-hmm. But I work with people oftentimes for long periods of time, and I also get this because I'm a retired professor now. But when I worked when I was professor at Temple University. Mm-hmm. I had a Tuesday, Thursday schedule or a Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule, and I could use the days that I didn't teach or didn't have committee work or something like that to do to just do abduction, hypnosis and all.
Sure.
And my typical time spent with an abductee was about 5 hours. An hour of speaking, a couple hours, maybe even as long as 3, with hypnosis, and then another hour speaking and talking to each other and all that. And so I then, by doing that, I was able to dig a lot deeper for a lot of people, and I didn't have like a 50-minute time limit or an hour and a half time limit or something like that for people who or hypnotherapists, for example. And so I was able to dig a lot deeper than most other researchers, and people stayed with me for as long as they wanted, and I never charged any money for anything. So whenever they wanted to come, we would make an appointment, and that was it. So it's something that is actually it goes back for a long time in American society, probably back to the late 19th century, at least to the early 20th century. Although we don't really find out about it, as I mentioned before, until 1957. But what we're looking at here ultimately is one sort of group of obviously technologically advanced beings who have come here to live in the society and therefore kind of take it over, in my opinion. And because this is a global phenomenon, now I don't know what's happening, for example, in North Korea. Uh-huh. And I don't know what's happening in a lot of other countries, but we know that it happens in Europe and Latin America and Asia and so forth. Mm-hmm. And
that's enough.
Yeah, Australia, New Zealand, whatever. It's people have been, and I get abductee letters from the Middle East. I mean, it's everywhere. So this is a global phenomenon, and it's also surreptitious. And the way that they keep it secret is by keeping it secret from the abductees. Mm-hmm. Now, because they are living sentient beings, and so are we, nothing is ever perfect. But it's good enough. It's good enough to have this subject be perhaps, and this is the craziness of it all, the gravest existential threat to human life that has ever happened in the history of humanity, or it's just this crazy psychological phenomenon going on. There's nothing in the middle.
Well, no, there isn't, and I think the former obviously has legs. The latter is just a...
Right, well, if this were psychological, and the way I tell people when I talk about it this way, for example, I gave a talk at Oxford University in 2013. Mm-hmm. My sponsor said I was the first person to talk about UFO abductions in 800 years there, and which I got a laugh out of. But the fact is, though, that the way I presented it was mainly to faculty members, was saying the evidence for it: people are abducted and are physically missing from their normal environments. Police have been called and search parties have been sent out and all that sort of stuff. They're physically gone. Or people see other people being abducted, and they may or may not be abducted themselves. And people are abducted in groups and can confirm each other's abduction. Sometimes a person will run into a person who they saw on a UFO during an abduction.
Yes.
And this happens, not a whole lot, but it does happen. And there's other aspects to it that are physical. People come back with unusual marks and scars on their body, sometimes fully formed scars. I met with a woman once. We had a session here, and then I saw her, and then she left. Actually, she spent the night with her mother, who she lived in another state, and then she would spend the night here and then go back to the other state, and which was Virginia. And the next day I was pushing a cart in a supermarket, and I go around the corner, and there she is standing there. I said, "My gosh, what are you doing here?" I was so astounded to see her. I was, it just wasn't in my mind.
Was she looking at you when you first saw her?
No, she just was looking for me, and then she ran into me as I went around the corner of this.
I got it.
And in pushing the cart in the supermarket, and I said, "Well, how did you get here?" She said, "Well, I called your wife, who told me where you were, and I had to show you something." And she says, "Look at this." And she shows me her right hand, and there's a 1-inch fully formed scar between her thumb and her first finger. That scar was not there the day before, and this was scar tissue.
And it looked aged.
It was fully formed scar tissue.
Wow.
It was not raw, it was not red, nothing like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then she said, "Look at this." And on her left hand, there was a fully formed scar tissue about an inch long between her thumb and her forefinger in the exact same place.
Oh, how strange.
I was looking at something that was not biologically possible.
No.
And I just, my mouth fell open. I just stared there. Because people have told me for years, well, they've got a scar from this. They don't know how they got it. It might be an 11-inch scar. They don't know how they got it, which is, of course, crazy. But this was something that had happened just the night before, and I was just astonished. And I saw that. So people have these kinds of experiences. There's a certain amount of evidence beyond just anecdotal evidence retrieved through hypnosis administered by amateurs like me.
Do you think, is it possible that any of your clients were hybrid or hubrid?
No, none.
Okay. They might have been playing a trick on you just to see how you go about it or study you or something. I don't know.
No, but however, that subject will be the subject of another book I will write soon.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to say anything about it right now, but it will be the subject. It will be a whole book on one person's activities involved with trying to keep away from hybrids. But the point is that there is evidence for this, and the problem here is that this is an orphan science of sorts. There's only a handful of us in the whole country who do any kind of research.
Oh, it's a sequestered science. It's not there. It doesn't exist.
It's an absent science. It's a non-existent science. It isn't a science. Scientists and academics have no interest in this subject whatsoever.
They're afraid they don't want to get tarnished. They're afraid. A lot of them.
Only bad things can happen to them if they make it public that they're interested.
Of course. Yeah.
Nothing good comes of this.
No.
And when I do talks at conferences, I look out into the audience and I see nothing but gray hair.
That's unfortunate. That's too bad. Like at a symphony concert. That's too darn bad.
That's exactly right. Like at a symphony concert. That's the same thing. And my hair is totally white. I'm ancient. There's nobody coming up the pipeline to take my place. The problem here is you can't, there's a lot of young people who are interested in doing it, but you can't have young people delving into the personal lives of older adults. They will not tell you things.
No, they'll shut down.
Right, exactly. So I like people to be at least 40 to start doing this. But when you're 40, you already have a career or a job and a family and kids and this and that, and it takes too much time.
They're counting on. They know the hybrids, whoever's behind this. They know this. They've got time on their side.
They've got time on their side, and talking about that, the question is, how long do the insectoids or insect-looking ones, the leaders, how long do they live? How much time do they have?
Yeah.
We don't know the answer to that, but we do know that this program has been going on for, I can trace it back with a high degree of certainty to 1917 and with a relative degree of certainty to the last quarter of the 19th century. And after that, we lose complete sight of it. There's
that makes sense, though. That's about the time frame I would expect something like this to have to be carried out in. It takes time. They've done it right, methodically. You could fill in the blanks better than any human on the planet.
Right. Time is on their side.
Yeah.
Apparently, time means nothing. And when you are involved with what I call planetary acquisition, which I think this is. Now, once again, I'm speculating here.
I got it.
Then you have all the time in the world. It's doable. It is doable because eventually there'll be lots and lots and lots, and there'll be tremendous numbers of hybrids I should say, here, who are controlling a shrinking number of humans, perhaps, or at least controlling humans that do whatever
if they'll let us hang around over time, a long time? Or if
there is a question about that.
Yeah.
There is a question about that.
This planet may not be ours. Frankly, we've forfeited the right to be caretakers of it. Look what we've done to it, for God's sakes.
Well, there is that, but I don't think they care about that one way or the other, to tell you the truth. I mean, they started back when we weren't doing anything to the planet,
Well, they can probably fix it if they want to.
I guess.
I wouldn't be surprised. David, this is amazing. You've outdone yourself with this book, and I really mean that. The threat was the first one. Now we're walking among us. Get this book, friends. Don't try to convince anyone you know. If they won't read the book, then you'll lose friends. This is way out there for a lot of people. It's scary. It's threatening to them. But it's real. It's really happening. This is not a joke. Congratulations, David. Great to talk to you again, really.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it.
All right. You be well.
Talk to you later, then.
Okay. Good night.
Bye-bye.
David Jacobs, Walking Among Us, an extremely important book. Extremely important. Okay, back in a minute. Walking Among Us. The alien plan to control humanity. Well, that might or might not be a bad idea, depending upon how you look at it. The threat is real. Walking Among Us is a chronicle of human experience that contradicts every current theory about the universe that we think we live in. David Jacobs' human observers have experienced a concealed reality that is literally next door to some of us, and that he believes is about to interact secretly and insidiously with the rest of us. Walking Among Us explains why extraterrestrial UFOs are here, who is aboard them, and what they are doing. To put it mildly, the evidence from the people that Jacobs has interviewed shows that the extraterrestrials are up to no good. You'll find Walking Among Us hard to put down. It ought to be a bestseller, and I hope it is. If enough of us read and pay attention to the evidence in this book, we might be able to avoid the disaster that its evidence portends.
Soon everybody will be happy. Soon everyone will know his place. And
now this you heard from more than one person. I want to make
absolutely.
That clear. All right.
No, one person never makes it into print.
No.
So you have to wait, for other people who are unaware of that testimony to say basically the same thing. And I've got a lot of people saying that. And so the gray aliens would say, well, soon there's going to be a change. The change is coming, and everybody's going to love it. It's going to be the change. The change is coming. And
I wonder why they always said it was going to be a positive change and everyone would love it. If they're behind it, I guess they would love it, but maybe
well, that's
we
the thing.
wouldn't.
Yeah, that's exactly right. This is what they said. Everybody's going to be happy. But I think that they mainly meant themselves. I don't think they particularly care about humans one way or the other, to tell you the truth. But other than to overcome them. But I sort of ended the book with this business about the change that was coming in the future and
on this planet. And David called it the threat. And the interesting part of it is that when he began his research, he didn't want to go to the conclusions he came to. He was just looking for the facts. And they brought him to some facts that were very uncomfortable. What can you sum that up for our listeners who may not remember The Threat, which is a classic?
Well, the first book I wrote on abductions came out in '92, called Secret Life, where I concentrated sort of on what happens to people during a typical abduction event. And I'd only been doing hypnosis for about 5 years at that time, and I still was not able to fully understand what was real and what wasn't real, so I made a couple of mistakes in that book that I'm a little bit ashamed of now. But The Threat was the next book 5 years later, and that book was much more much less involved with what they do to abductees, although it was that, of course, but also about something that the gray aliens, anyway, were saying to abductees, which was, soon we will all be together.
Okay, let's get going here. We've got a full schedule tonight, as we always do, Monday through Friday, in our 23rd year of serving you with information that we'd like you to consider, not to believe, but just to engage in the process of thinking, evaluating, make your own decisions. I'm not here to tell you what to think, just asking you to please engage in the process. That's what the government and many others don't want you to do. They don't want you to think anymore. They just want you to accept and to react and follow orders. We have, as our first guest tonight, a man I hold in extremely high regard and I have not been able to spend much time with him over the years. I think he's been on twice in the past. He is Professor Dr. David M. Jacobs, Ph.D., who has just written another book. And this doesn't happen very often. That's the point. Let me read a little bit from the back for you so you get an idea. The book is entitled Walking, by Don C. Donderi, Ph.D., Associate Professor, retired of Psychology, McGill University, Montreal, author of UFOs, ETs, and Alien Abductions. There are more, but David, welcome back to the program. It's been far too long. I know you're busy, but I'm really glad you took time to be with us tonight. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me, Jeff. I appreciate it.
I don't know how. I'll bet it's been 15 years.
Probably, yeah. The last book I published was a book published by University of Kansas Press called UFOs and Abductions, Challenging the Borders of Knowledge. But that was an edited book that I did. With there were 10 sort of important figures in the UFO and abduction world who wrote chapters. But the previous book I wrote was The Threat, which came out in 1998.
Well, there you go. Okay, 98, that would have been, well, shortly after that. I started this program in 94. So, The Threat. Now, I remember this book on many levels, and one of them was that it really brought to bear upon those who read it the reality of an ongoing operation